Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the GTX 690. The GTX 690 was one of Nvidia's last multi-GPU cards and the last dual 80-tier card made, excluding the Titan Z, but that doesn't really count. Featuring two GK104 cores found in the GTX 680, it launched in May of 2012 for an MSRP of $999, which was double the price of the 680. And boy, what a price to pay. By this point, S-Lite was going out of fashion, so paying double price for a slightly worse single GPU performance and similar multi-GPU performance with higher power consumption, it's no wonder why this was one of the last dual cards Nvidia made. This one has clearly been used for a long time. According to the previous owner, he only upgraded last year, so I guess the $1,000 this guy spent was well spent. But let's give this a good clean while we take a look underneath the shroud. After a quick bit of pre-disassembly, because this card was really complicated, we can see just how dirty the acrylic and heatsinks were. But that's nothing a few cotton swabs and tissues can't fix. And there, much better. After removing both the heatsinks and wiping away the crusty thermal paste, we can see the large vapor chambers on the base of them to help keep the GPU cores cool. Each core has 128 TMUs, 32 ROPs, and 1536 CUDA cores. Clocked at 915 MHz with a boost of 1019 MHz. Being based on the brand new at the time Kepler architecture, these were a big upgrade from the previous firmware cores, running faster and cooler than the outgoing core. They also each come equipped with 2GB of GDDR5 memory clocked at 1502 MHz, but only 2GB of the actual memory is usable in practicality. For all my testing, I've had just one of the GPUs enabled to maximize compatibility with my games library. Now, let's plug this into my system and see how it performs in the benchmarks. First up, we have Doom Eternal. This was run at 1154p with 50% resolution scale at the lowest settings and still only achieved an average of 33 FPS with 1% lows of 8 FPS and 0.1% lows of 3 FPS. Now, those sound okay, but as you can see from the footage, there was immense stutter every time the VRAM got filled up. So, with just a little bit more VRAM, maybe this could be playable, but in its current state, I wouldn't want to spend more than the benchmarking time playing this game. Control at 1366p with the medium settings and high textures achieve a much better average of 45 FPS with 1% lows of 36 FPS and 0.1% lows of 18 FPS. And may I note that it went much higher in some sections of the game, so just depending on what the action will be. Even during the combat it stayed around 30 FPS, so this was a very playable experience, and I could play this game for hours on here. For a game that doesn't need a higher frame rate, we have Hitman 2, rendered at 900p medium settings. It achieved an average of 47 FPS, with 1% lows of 18 FPS and 0.1% lows of 10 FPS. Perfectly playable. Now we have the CSGO Community Benchmark map. At 1080p with competitive settings, it achieved an average of 211 FPS, and this may have even been a CPU bottleneck, because my RAM configuration was a little bit messed up for this video. So who knows how much you could get, but this seems perfectly playable even with my messed up system. BeamNG Drive at 1080p normal settings achieved an average of 50 FPS on the jungle map, with 1% lows of 42 FPS and 0.1% lows of 27 FPS. This was very playable and I could play hours for this. It might shrug on some of the heavier to run maps, but on most standard maps, even some of the crashing ones, it will be perfectly fine. Coming in at 58 FPS, Fortnite is extremely playable at the 1080p medium preset, with render resolution turned up to 100%, with 1% lows of 34 FPS and 0.1% lows of 11 FPS coming from the battle bus sequence at the beginning. Very playable. This one was really surprising for me. Teardown at 1080p with a 75% resolution scale on the low settings achieve an average of 36 FPS with 1% lows of 26 FPS and 0.1% lows of 9 FPS. Now these don't sound too high, but considering what some of other cards have been getting, I am more than happy with this, and I would play this for hours. Another surprising game is Battlefield 5. This was run at 1080p on the low preset and achieved an average of 39 FPS during the tank level, with 1% lows of 29 FPS and 0.1% lows of 25 FPS. This was a very consistent experience and would probably hold up great during online multiplayer. New to the benchmarks, we have Cyberpunk 2077. I know this game's hated, but it's still quite hard to run. Or apparently not, because at 1080p with FSR set to quality, all low settings achieve an average of 35 FPS, with 1% lows of 22 FPS and 0.1% lows of 21 FPS on the built-in benchmark. Real world gameplay may vary, but I'd say this is a pretty good result. For our last gameplay test, we have Overwatch 1. I mean Overwatch 2. Completely different games. It was set to 1080p at low and achieved an average of 153 FPS with 1% lows of 107 FPS and 0.1% lows of 35 FPS. An extremely competitive experience, and I would be happy to get into gold on this. In my Unit in Heaven normal benchmark, it achieved a score of 1572 with an FPS of 62.4. In the Extreme benchmark, it achieved an average of 35 FPS and a score of 875. So why did I make this video? It's not because I think this card's a good value. Going for around £100 on eBay, it's terrible value, not providing nearly enough good performance. I got mine for £40 off Facebook, and even with that, it's still not a great value. But it's the GTX 690. 690. Makes me laugh, makes me smile. I love this card. Just 5, wanted one for years, ever since I was building my first computer and I saw one in the window of CEX. Now I have one, and I'm glad I do. It's a very nice looking card. I love the shroud designs of these older Founders Edition cards, or reference cards. I just think they look great. The one I have in particular is a Gigabyte one, unsurprisingly. And I'm sure you can find one on eBay that I recommend passing. So, this is an okay card, but I wouldn't say it's up to that much in 2022 in terms of bang to the buck value, which is all that it could be seen for other than a collector's item. As always, thank you very much for watching. Please stick around to the next video. Ciao.